The Imperial Guard has a lot of tanks. Even discounting things like the Hellhound, there are a grand total of 17 different datasheets, again not counting transports and things like the Hellhound and such. So we're kinda spoiled for choice as far as big tracked vehicles go. However, 17 datasheets just isn't enough for me. So to bring a little bit more interest into my fully kitbashed and converted Krieg army, I'm dredging up a tank from an old epic edition of Warhammer 40,000. So welcome to Gone Hollow Minis. My name is Colt, and today we are resurrecting the Ragnarok. Okay, before we get into the actual kit bash, we need to go over what exactly the Ragnarok is, and why we haven't seen it since 2005. Firstly, feel free to use the timestamp below to skip right to the kit bash, if you're not into the lore and all the background stuff. The Ragnarok first saw the tabletop in Warhammer 40,000 Epic, specifically being published in the Swordwind supplement. This book saw new support for Eldar, Imperial Guard, and Orc units. It's centered around the world of Baron, a former Exodite world which saw control by the Eldar, Orcs, and Imperium in turn. Here we see a ton of now obscure Imperial Guard vehicles, a veritable treasure trove of slightly goofy looking tanks for kitbashers to work from. And there's the Ragnarok. From this little blurb, we're told that it's a tank that was designed and built by Krieg during their 5-century civil war. In these 500 years between the war and nuclear weapons, Krieg was kind of becoming a nuclear wasteland. And when you're disconnected from the Imperium for so long, eventually you're gonna run out of Lehman Russes. So Krieg's answer was the Ragnarok. On the one hand, it was a stopgap to fill the lack of other standard tanks. On the other though, it gave the Krieg a chance to create an entirely Krieg tank, designed specifically for the toxic wastelands they love to fight in so much. As the Swordwind supplement highlights, the result was an ugly, square-hulled, slow, short-ranged vehicle designed to handle whatever environmental hazards the battlefield could throw at it. It seems a little larger than a Lehman Russ, but maybe not quite a match for the Rogel Dorn. As for representation outside of the supplement, pickings are a little slim. It's mentioned in Steve Lyons' Krieg novel, and we've actually seen a World of Tanks skin for the KV-2 fashioned after a Valhallan Ragnarok. Though it's important to note that this is just a skin for the KV-2, and doesn't change the hull to match the Ragnarok. And yeah, that's about it as far as the Ragnarok goes. It did of course get an epic model to go with the supplement, but again that's an epic scale so it's a little small and details are a little soft. So let's figure out where to start by collecting some reference images. And okay, cool, that's all we get. Of course, that's a joke, but not by much. We've got very few official pictures of this thing that are floating around the internet. Pretty much just these pictures from the supplement book, and this image of a modeled Ragnarok from a game or mod that I can't find cited anywhere. So if you do recognize it, please let me know. We could start with a Warhammer kit, but I couldn't find anything that got me close enough. There's an absolutely gorgeous conversion that uses a Chimera chassis, but I want to try and match the track layout of the Epic model. So to make this both easier and harder on myself, I'm going to use a scale model KV-2 kit as the base for this conversion. It'll be easier in that it basically just gives me the turret, the most recognizable part of the tank. We will need to do some radical restructuring to the hull, but that would be the same if we used a 40k kit too. And scale model tanks are at least thinner plastic. Now a note on scale real quick. Warhammer, of course, doesn't have a defined scale. Models are designed in heroic scale, which basically means whatever scale portrays the miniature the best on the tabletop. Proportions are a little bit off, though they've become slightly less cartoony as time goes on. From talking with my brother, who does a lot of model tanks, and doing a bit of research, the closest scale to Warhammer would be somewhere around 150 something. But good luck finding any kit you want in that scale. So we're instead going for a 148 scale kit. I found this KV-2 kit on eBay for like 30 bucks. It's technically a German captured version of the Russian KV-2, but the differences that they made were so slight and we're going to be changing this thing up so much that it doesn't really matter. It's worth mentioning again though that the details of this model kit will not match up with the details on a Warhammer kit. If we just painted this model kit Krieg blue and called it a day, it would stick out like a sore thumb. Warhammer kits are designed to be recognizable from tabletop distance, and their details are resized to match. Most details are just larger and more dramatically sized. So since we've already got so much reconstruction to do, I'm going to be using spare parts from a Baneblade wherever I can, instead of plastic art. You might remember this from my Rogel Dorn kit bash, but I got a whole box of these bits off of eBay for, again, around $30. You can find lots like this fairly regularly from people that didn't want to go through the hassle of magnetizing their Baneblade variants. Using these pieces will help me to incorporate more 40k scale details, helping the end result to blend in better with the other tanks it'll be fighting alongside. Now, a question that I get on pretty much every kitbash and conversion video is, why don't I just 3D print this? And to be entirely blunt, I do actually enjoy kitbashing. There's nothing wrong with 3D printing, and I'm sure I could find some gorgeous Ragnarok files out there, but I actually enjoy doing this process and making something that's entirely unique to me and my army. Even if you're not using GW plastic, using a fully 3D printed model has always just kind of felt like using a stock kit to me. Again, there's nothing wrong with that, but I find this process a lot more entertaining and a lot more interesting. But with all of that finally out of the way, we can get started. I'm going to go ahead and begin with the turret. Most of the changes here are just cosmetic, so it'll give us a starting point and an easy win to work off of. The first big change here was all of the hatches. The one on the top was a spare piece from a Solar Auxilia Lehman Russ. They give you both round and square hatch options, and I opted for the square ones on my Lehman Russes, so I have a few of these left over. I just drilled through the top of the KV-2 turret, inset the replacement hatch piece, and later filled in that space with a piece of plastic card to blend it in a little bit better. Now there's also these two big circles on the sides of the turret. I can't really tell what these are for certain, but I'm assuming they might be bailout hatches of some kind, so I'm going to use spare Rhino chassis hatches. To get a flatter appearance, I installed the actual hatch doors upside down. Now for the gun. Despite the gun on the KV-2 being fairly formidable for its time, it's nothing by Warhammer standards, so we'll need a replacement. A little work was done to the mantlet, omitting the final piece that's supposed to attach here and replacing it with a curved piece of polystyrene. For the cannon itself, I started with another Baneblade piece. This is, I believe, part of the Hellhammer cannon? For the barrel, I couldn't find any GW plastic that matched the size that I wanted, so I used an old felt tip marker. Plastic is plastic after all. I don't really expect this thing to be GW legal anyway. I left the gun long for now, but I will cut it back down once we have the whole tank done. After that though, most of the changes to the turret were cosmetic. Greebles, gubbins, and all the other bits that you'd expect to see on a Warhammer tank. I did make sure to have my Rogaldorn and Lehman Russ nearby to compare it to, just to keep things cohesive. Okay, that is the easy part out of the way. It's all uphill from here. To get the whole shape and track layout where we want it, we're going to have to work back and forth between the two. But I'll start with the front of the hull. I started by using a Sharpie to mark out the side geometry, keeping closely to my reference images. There's two angled panels at the front, a flat section where I assume the driver sits, and then a vertical step up to the turret deck. So I roughed that in and got to cutting, using a hobby saw to keep the cuts decently symmetrical on both sides. Now I do want to mention here that there was a lot of sanding involved in this project, so much so that it made me get one of those little desktop vacuum cleaners. I cut out a lot of the footage because it's not exactly entertaining, but just keep in mind that pretty much every cut I make involves roughly 10 minutes of sanding afterwards, just to get everything to line up correctly. Luckily though, these Baneblade side skirt pieces fit almost perfectly where I need them to. They're pretty much exactly as wide as the KV hull is, so I was able to just cement them in place normally. Though I did try and sand in some matching bevels where multiple plates met. Now I wanted the step up to the turret ring to be a little taller than it was on the scale model, so to do that I cut some strips of plasticard or polystyrene. These then got attached to the sides of the bathtub hull, reinforced with yet more strips. Once that was all dried and cured, I could sand it down to the proper height. The last modification to the front, for now, was the little driver's cupola. This was originally done in yet another chunk of Baneblade gun. I'm not sure which variant this was. I did later decide that this wasn't quite the right shape and replace it with another bit of random plastic rubbish I had lying around, because it's not a true kitbash if you're not recycling trash while you're doing it. Last part to figure out before jumping back to the tracks was the top deck. I went ahead and just reused the turret ring from the model kit, but built out the rest of the section using polystyrene. Okay, now the tracks, and man was this a saga. I had these resin tracks that came in that Baneblade lot that I actually liked the look of. They may not be historical, but I liked the idea of more aggressive flanges digging deeper into muddy landscapes for more traction. Like I said, not historical, but if I wanted realism, I'd go play bolt action. I'm here for rule of cool. That said, I don't actually know where the original seller got them, so if you do recognize these, please let me know so I can credit the original creator. Originally, I thought that the tank needed a little bit more height, so I goofily extended the lower wheels. This was not the right call. I turned out to not need the extra height, and even if I did, it just made it look too goofy. Take two. For this second attempt, I had to remake my own front wheels. These are two 25mm bases with some added details using square and round polystyrene rod. The big front wheel is pretty important to the Ragnarok silhouette, I think, so making my own would let me make sure to include it. It's also worth noting that I undid the previous road wheel mistake, and then was able to link the tracks up and over. The regular resin pieces were a tiny bit long, so I just cut off one of these segments before putting them on. Now there's a bit of weird geometry here at the back that I wanted to make sure I didn't screw up. So once I got one side of the tracks on, I went ahead and took care of that. There's a slight indent at the very back of the tank that'll become important when we get to the track covers. So just like the modifications we made to the front of the hull, I marked, sawed, and filled in back here. While I was at it, I also applied some extra plates at the tank's rear to get that industrial, angled, riveted look. Now for the side skirts and track covers. I had these pieces left over from the Rogel Dorn, since I omitted them in that build. They don't reach all the way forward, but I could fix that with a little bit of an extra spacer. With that on, I made sure that the outwards facing edge was flat, then could apply my side skirt. This big piece of plastic is, you guessed it, from the Baneblade kit. It has a ton of great detail and panel lining, but enough empty space for us to add some stowage onto it later. I just cut this to length, then attached it with plastic cement. Same on the other side, of course. Now, last major detail is to fix a little bit of the hull's geometry. We can see that it actually kind of flares out over the track covers around the turret, creating these little cutouts for the top turret sponson things. You get the picture of how I did this by now. Measure, stick on the flat top panels, bevel the angled edge, and fill it in with other plastic bits, either from a kit or just plastic art. Mine ended up a little bit shallow. I think my track covers ended up a little bit too high. But frankly, it still gets the point across, and I still do really like how it looks, so I went ahead and left it. Finally, in the home stretch now. I made the side turrets out of some more segments of Baneblade cannon, but any plastic tubing or cylinder would work. Once it was cut to size, I added a piece of plastic art to both the top and the bottom, drilled out a hole in the bottom, then made a corresponding peg of polystyrene rod. This gives me some rudimentary rotation for these turrets. Not much, but worth including if you have the time. The guns on these turrets are yet again from the Solar Auxilia vehicle sprue. You get a small frame with a whole bunch of these, and I think they're just about perfect for this. I just added a couple pieces of square styrene rod to make a kind of bracket around them, just for a bit more detail. From there, it's finally just a matter of greebles and weathering. Most of this stowage is from either the Baneblade or Rogel Dorn. These cylinders on the side are from Baneblade exhaust pipes glued together. Adding stuff like this really makes a model feel lived in, which is why I always recommend picking up bit slots on eBay if you find them. You can get some pretty useful, really interesting bits for builds like this. I also opted to omit the usual Krieg dozer blade. I do think it would look great with one on, but I wanted to show off all of the work that I'd done on this guy. After that, it was a matter of mud and rust. You can see the particulars of how I do this in this video about my Rogel Dorn Kitbash. There you can also see how I paint my Krieg vehicles. And speaking of, that's pretty much all we have left to do on this tank. So let's throw on some pigment and see what we're left with. Man, was this a lot of work. But after all of that, I am so happy with how it turned out. The size ended up pretty much where I wanted it, and the use of Baneblade armor panels really helps it blend in with the rest of the 40k lineup. There are some differences, of course, and I could have worked on refinements and gap filling and all that until the day that I died, but I'm actually perfectly fine leaving it here. Every project needs an end, and I'm happy with where this one is at. After all, the only person in the world that needs to be impressed with your Warhammer army is you. And I think this tank will look perfect, right next to the other vehicles in the motor pool of the 179th. Thank you all for watching this kit bash. Like I said, this one was a ton of work. I cut out about an hour of sanding footage alone, but don't let that dissuade you. Between the scale model kit and the Baneblade parts, I spent about $60 on this whole kit bash, which is about the price of a Lehman Russ, and I think this one looks a whole lot cooler. So if you do give this kit bash a shot, make sure to tag me on wherever you share it. I would love to see more of these tanks in the wild. But that'll about do it for today. If you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate a like and a comment to let me know what you liked or didn't like. Subscribe and turn on notifications to not miss the next kit bash, and until I meet again, friends, be safe, be kind, and don't you dare go hollow.